usually meet. Congratulations on that big feat for the day. I'm really excited to host this K Club. This has been sort of on our K Club bucket list for a long time, to have a program official come and talk to us, sort of open up the curtains and show us what goes on behind there, and give us lots of tips and tricks, and hopefully there'll also be time for questions. Before we get to that, though, I do want to follow through on our requisite K Club drawing. As you all know, and you've probably heard me say before, we really, I'll say crave, that's probably not too strong a word, your feedback. We want to hear about what you like, what you don't like, what you want to hear more about. The K Club is put on expressly for our K Clubbers. We want to make sure that we're addressing topics that are most important to you. So in this not Crown Royal bag is the names of the people who responded to last month's survey and gave us feedback. And you are now in the running for the limited edition K Club mug. And today, likewise, if you respond to our survey, you will be put into the not Crown Royal bag, and then we'll do our drawing at our January K Club. So I'll have our guest speaker draw the name. And the winner is Sarah Belcher. No, I think Sarah. She's zooming. Okay, well, if you're listening, Sarah, congratulations. We'll make sure you get your mug. All right. I would like to now turn it over to Kimby Hagan, who is faculty in the School of Public Health. And for those of you, I think probably already know, but just to note that K Club is generously sponsored by Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, Department of Pediatrics, Department of Medicine, the Georgia CTSA, as well as the Center for AIDS Research.
Yes. I asked Stacey if I could introduce Anne because she has been at the NIH for 18 years. 17 years of those years, she has been my program officer through the Center for AIDS Research. She was at that time with the CFAR program. She has recently gotten a promotion to her new position, Associate Director for the Basic Science Program in the Division of AIDS at NIH, which is the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases. The NIH. I met Anne when she came to do a reverse site visit for us when we were first funded as a CFAR, and that was when the first germ of wanting this talk to happen, because it's when I first met my program officer face to face, and we were talking about it at lunch. She said, "You were scared, weren't you?" I said, "I was shaking. I was so scared meeting my program. I was sure I was going to say the wrong thing. I was sure I was going to ask a question that was going to give her a bad impression of me." And as soon as I met her, I realized she was a human being who really, really, really wanted our CFAR to succeed. And she wanted to do what she could to make sure that our grant and our CFAR succeeded. And that impression has held through the next 17 years. So even though she's now in a larger position, I still contact her and ask questions. So she is going to be in a great position, not only to give the talk that she has, but to answer any questions that come up while she's talking or at the end of it. Very approachable, knows a lot, and we agreed during lunch that if she didn't know the answer, I will Google it really fast while she's talking, and I'll hear the answer. Okay, thank you, Anne.
Thank you. I just want to thank Stacey and Kimby and Barbara for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to talk with you guys, and I hope you ask questions throughout. This is really for you. Some of this might be information you're familiar with, but don't be afraid to ask questions when you have any. So, sorry about my voice. I have laryngitis, but I'm not contagious. I'm here to talk today about tips and strategies for having effective and valuable interactions with program officers and others, and I'll talk a little bit about our roles too. So the outline for today's talk is what happens after your application arrives at the NIH, who makes up the extramural team that you would work with, when and why should you contact the program officer, and what do you do if you happen to miss a K-line, what are your options? So most of you are probably familiar with this process. So when you have an idea and you put together a grant application, your school submits it on your behalf to, and it goes to the Center for Scientific Review for assignment to a study section. Then it gets reviewed at a study section. and I'll go through some of these steps later. And then our institute also has a second level review through the advisory council, and then it gets recommended for funding or not. So as I mentioned, there's a dual level review system. The scientific review group is the first one. They look at, these are independent investigators who are experts in your field of study, who will evaluate your project for scientific merit, significance, and other criteria. And then they provide a priority score and recommend a score. And then what happens a few months later is that it comes to an advisory council, especially if you make the pay line, and they assess whether it should be recommended as funding. And then you get an award after that. So I want to go through just sort of the extramural team, because there are many of us that you will work with once you're funded, or you already have if you have been funded. So I'll talk from the standpoint of a program officer. You'll also have contact with the scientific review officer and a grants management officer. So in general, the program officer is going to be responsible for programmatic, scientific, and technical aspects of your grant. We can provide you with scientific guidance, both pre and post award. We also develop initiatives and then provide post-award oversight. In general, scientific review officer is responsible for the scientific and technical review of your application. They ensure that there's a fair and unbiased evaluation of your application. They provide the summary statement from the review of your application, and then look at applications for completeness and conformance on the requirements. And they'll be the point of contact once your application is in that phase. The grants management officer is responsible for completion of business management requirements. So they'll evaluate your application for administrative content and compliance with policy. They'll interpret any policies around grants administration, answer questions about your budget and other support, clarify issues related to terms and conditions of your award, and then any other actions that need prior approval. So this just gives you a little bit of a illustration of who you would contact at what point of your application. So as I mentioned, pre-submission, I recommend that you contact your program officer, because we can help guide you through different processes that I'll talk about later. And in some institutes, like at the National Cancer Institute, instead of calling the program official a program officer, they're sometimes called program directors, but we serve the same purpose. And then once your application's in, as I mentioned, it'll be the SRO. So if you happen to need to provide any supplementary materials, that's the person you would contact. And then post-review, both the program officer and the grants management officer will work with you to get your award out. So the role of a program officer, again, is to administer our scientific programs. We oversee grant portfolios, set priorities for committing federal programs, and we act as an advocate for the scientific area. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard of NIH Reporter? And how many of you have used the PO Matchmaker tool? Have you heard of that tool? It is a really cool tool, and I just talked to one of my colleagues at work about this and asked if he had anyone contact him through this tool. So what you can do is when you have an abstract for your application, you can cut and paste it directly into the box that you see here, and it'll pull up program officers who have your scientific area of expertise as their portfolio. It's not always 100% accurate, but if a program officer is contacted by an applicant or grantee and it might not be their best fit, they'll find someone for you to contact. So it's a really cool tool. I suggest that you play around with it and see who you get matched up with. Now, if you're applying for a solicited funding opportunity announcement, those will have the program officer's name on this. This will really help you if you're applying for an unsolicited R01 or that type of grant. So it's really neat. So our role as a scientist, our prime responsibility is to monitor and understand a particular scientific area within our own institute at NIH. And so let me just say that I work at NIH, I work in the Division of AIDS, and so you really need to contact your program officer wherever you're working with, because there are variations in how we do things across the institutes at the NIH, and even within our own institute at NIH, our Division of AIDS might do things slightly differently from our sister division. So it's really important to contact your program officer, because they can walk you through all of those nuances. But a lot of this, what I'll talk about today, does apply to generally too. So we provide scientific expertise to our colleagues at NIH and other components at NIH and other federal agencies. We are responsible for reading and reviewing current literature, so we're on top of where the field is moving towards. We're responsible for identifying knowledge gaps, attending scientific meetings, and interacting with the grantee community to assess research needs. And I'll talk a little bit more about why we do these things later. We're also a portfolio manager, so we have to ensure that the research that we support with federal funds meets scientific program requirements, including compliance with laws and regulations. We advise on funding opportunities and requirements for applications. I've talked many times to Kimby and to Shelley about even though they've had a CFAR for 20-some years, there's things that change, and so we often have to keep in contact about those changes. We monitor scientific progress in the grants that are funded that are in our portfolio, as well as cooperative agreements. And some of our colleagues oversee clinical trials and the production of scientific resources. We manage just the scientific and technical aspects of grants and contracts and cooperative agreements. And we provide input on priorities for committing federal funds that support research and resource programs. We're also an advocate. We serve as a resource for that. We develop scientific and technical research agendas that address gaps in domestic and foreign public health needs. We monitor and integrate scientific findings for the government's benefit. Some of us produce scientific papers and reports. We often are encouraged to move the science forward by also organizing workshops and symposia and to develop research initiatives. So in this picture, you can see some of our colleagues every other year organize this meeting strategies for an HIV cure. So our job is to bring together the leaders in a field to have them report on the progress. So why should you contact the program officer? So nowadays, everything is electronic, but over 80,000 grant applications are submitted to NIH, and so your grant is like one of those in this stack. And so if you want to make yourself known and your research and what you want to do, I really encourage you to contact your program officer so you kind of stand out in this like room of grants. And we have 3 cycles a year, as you know. So pre-submission, you should contact your program officer to discuss your potential application, your topic, the scientific directions that you want to take, whether there's a funding announcement out there that really meets the area that you want to pursue, or is it better for you to go the unsolicited route through an investigator-initiated research. Program officer can help you strategize about timing. So as you know, our fiscal year starts in September, and we have an early receipt date that goes September, October. That will be funded at some point when we get a budget. So we don't have a budget now. We're on a continuing resolution until December 20th. The signs look good that we, may have something signed, but until we get even when the budget's signed, we have to wait for our appropriation. So a lot of times, by the time the funding comes to us, it might be like the spring when you would get funding. So if you're trying to strategize about when you're going to put an application in, let's say you're pretty ready to put an application in for September for the earlier council date, and you have a chance to get your summary statement and to reapply for the January date. If you, let's say you missed the pay line by a couple of points, you have a second chance within the same funding year to put one in. And something that I don't know if you're aware of, let's say your first application goes in and you miss the pay line by like 2 points, really sucks because you're so close. But you have fixable things that you can do to resubmit. Let's say you get a score that's worse. Well, what we can do is we can pull back from the first one. And I'll talk later about it, but there's this thing called selective pay that we can do. And so that we can go back to your first one. And so I know this happens at NIH. I can't speak for all the other institutes, but we've done that. And actually today we had a meeting about selective funding that I missed, but we do that. And so that's why it's really important to talk to the program officer, because they can help you strategize. Should you resubmit? Should you wait? Do you need to develop more preliminary data to come back? So those are the things that your program officer can talk to you about and kind of guide you through that process. They can also help you determine what grant type is best. Should you come in for an R1? Or do you not have enough data? Maybe you should come in for an R21 or R3. They can help you with that. And then they can help you also about which study section might best fit, because you can write in your cover letter that you would like this particular study section to review, because your application, because they might have the right set of expertise in that. And also the institute, because maybe you're doing something in HIV and women. Maybe it's more geared towards NIH, but it could be NICHD, the National Institute of Health and Health. And so we can kind of help you, because there might be another institute that fits better. And then we can give you general advice on preparing your application. Also, if you're submitting at sometime down the road an application that's $500,000 or more in direct costs, you have to contact your program officer, because you have to submit a request saying that you would like to submit an application that's over $500K. And and at least in the Division of AIDS, we have a review from the directors of the program, whether we want to accept that application or not, because we do have limited funds. And so you first have to get through that step. So you really need to talk to your program officer way ahead of time, because before you can even submit your application, you have to have that approval. So something to keep in mind down the road when you have, especially if you have grants that involve like monkeys, they'll have a lot of costs associated. So post-submission, once you get your summary statement, the program officer can help you if there's like a problematic code. Let's say you have concerns with your human subjects or animal or biohazards. They can help you figure out how to respond to get that code changed to an acceptable code. And then they can give you insights on the discussion that happened at the meeting. So we always attend the review meeting. So we're either listening by phone or we're there in person, and we can help you digest your summary statement. You know, oftentimes you'll get your summary statement and you might hone in on one point, but in the review session, the reviewers were really discussing point B, and that was the thing that kind of drove your score one way or another. And that's something that a program officer can really help you, you know, kind of navigate that. And then, as I mentioned before, they can help you with resubmission strategies, or if there's alternate options, maybe it might have worked better with a different mechanism or different institute or different study section. The program officer can help you with that. So, sure.
So I noticed at the top of that slide, it says after you get your summary statement.
Yes.
So is it true then, between the time you're scored and you get your summary statement, that you shouldn't be contacting your program officer?
You should contact your program.
Before the summary statement comes out?
Some program officers won't talk to you until they get a summary statement. That all depends. But, you know, like today was the CFAR review at the end of today, and we've already gotten emails from investigators saying, can we set up a meeting to talk about it? So in our case, like when I worked on the CFAR program, we did talk to people, but with the caveat that, you know, this is what I heard in discussion, but what comes out on the summary statement might be, I mean, it should be the same, but a lot of times program officers will want to wait, but usually the summary statement come out within, I don't know, like 6 weeks. Yeah.
So don't
So, but if you're in a rush, let's say like you get your score and you have a tight timeline to resubmit, you can ask and say, can you just give me like the general things that I should be prepared for, because I don't have a lot of time, where I need to know whether I need to resubmit. That's why it's really important to just, I mean, they'll tell you no if they're not comfortable with it, but it doesn't hurt to ask. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
So you said that you asked the program officer what's the best study session. I contacted the program officer also for the study session, and so it's so hard. When I talk to them, they always be like, what's the best thing? I've never done it.
Are you talking about the program officer or the scientific review? So sometimes, oh, okay, yeah, some program officers will have told you before that the study section that it was assigned to is the right one. In some cases, that might be true. In some where, you know, like right now with the whole ending the HIV epidemic initiative, for example, NIH is kind of going, well, at least for NIAID, it's more into implementation science research. I'm not sure, you know, which study section will be best for that. And so a program officer who, you know, works in that area will help you navigate whether, you know, one study section might be better than the other. But in some cases, it might be very clear cut. Okay, so where to start? So we always say researching the best fit for you is critical. What do we mean by that? Which grants are you eligible to apply for? You know, there are some investigators who, I don't know here, but on the phone maybe or online, if you're foreign, you might not be eligible to apply to certain types of grants. And then also, depending on like what level of data you have, those are things that your program officer can help you with. And what's the potential impact of your research to the field? I mentioned earlier about Reporter. If you go through Reporter and let's say you have an area that, you know, is your interest and you go through it and you search that and we're flooded in that specific area, that's something to look at. What are people already getting funded and doing, and how can you make your idea more novel, different than what we've already funded, what's already in the portfolio, and how much preliminary data do you have? Is this, and so Reporter is actually a really good tool to use just to kind of get the lay of the land. And then, is this something that the NIH is looking to fund, solicited versus unsolicited? One thing that I always tell the CFARs to look at is when we have council meetings, there's 3 times a year for all institutes. Any concept that might become initiatives has to be cleared through council. And so that kind of is a signal on what the institute thinks is of high priority. So it's something to look at on NIAID's website. We will have like what concepts cleared in like a brief paragraph on those. And the way we do things at NIAID is we provide, our concepts have to go 2 years before the funding announcement on the street if they get approved and if we have money for it. So it gives you sort of a signal on where we think the priorities are, i.e. potentially the money, right? So it's something to look at. And then again, you know, what grant mechanism is best for your situation. And then this came up, I think, at a meeting that the CFAR hosted a few weeks ago. Is it best to apply as a PI, a co-investigator, or a collaborator? And a question that came up in their meeting was the multiple PI. So if you come in as like the contact PI and then you have like an established person, we generally advise against it because that automatically will then disqualify you for the better pay line through the for the new investigator pay line. So right now, our interim pay line at NIAID, I think for the new investigators, about 4 points better. So once you come in as a multiple PI application with a senior person, then you're no longer eligible for the better pay line. So. That's multiple PI or 21? We do. Yeah, then it would apply for both. Yeah. Yeah, so most of my colleagues generally advise against coming in with MPI unless you've already had your first one-on-one funding because it is a better pay line. And at least like in discussions at our institute, like we really want to support early career investigators. And so we look at that list and we look at how close you are to the K line, and, you know, there's funds available, and if it's a high scientific priority, again, that's why you have to talk to your program officer, because they'll advocate for you if they think it's, you know, your research might fill a gap that we have. One of the most critical parts of your application, as you know, is your specific aims page. I know a lot of program officers will look at the one pager. They're not going to tell you how to fix it, but they'll give you some feedback on it. We're never going to read your whole application, but the specific aims page is one that, you know, you can ask your program officer, would you take a look at it and see if, you know, I'm on track? And generally, the ones that I know will give you some feedback. But you all know it's a one-page summary, but we really, in this one page, need to say why the problem that you're talking about is significant. What's the exciting preliminary data that you had that kind of sets you apart from maybe some of the others that you find in Reporter? What are your hypotheses that that are supported by your data? And how will your project significantly impact the field? We always look for that, reviewers look for that. And make sure you emphasize important points that you absolutely want the reviewers to know, because really they look at that page, and I've heard reviewers say this before, like during a review meeting, they'll be like, "I was so excited about this application when I saw that, and then it all just fell apart," or "I was not really that excited, it didn't get me, excited, but I, started seeing stuff." So really make this something that they want to keep on reading, but then don't let them down. Like, make sure you deliver on that, or else they'll be like, "I was so excited," and then they get irritated because it's like, "Oh, they didn't do what I thought they were going to do." And then, make sure that your aims are concise and don't have like a laundry list of things, because then you start kind of boring them. So some common pitfalls, and on the slide it says for young investigators, but I see it for established investigators too. The proposed project is not novel or innovative. Again, this is why I say look at Reporter. If we've already funded like 100 applications on what you want to do because you're excited about it, maybe your mentor did that, you want to continue on that, you can, but maybe have a twist to it. Even if a project's successful, there's no question, it's questionable whether it will have impact to the field. That's something that reviewers look at. Failure to convince reviewers of scientific rationale, that if you're describing, your research is descriptive, looking at bad, testing good, there's a lack of clear testable hypothesis, fishing expedition, you kind of hear that a lot, inadequate preliminary data to support such a large investment, an unfocused research plan, lack of experience in the proposed methodology, insufficient publication record, uncertainty concerning the future directions, failure to consider potential pitfalls or alternative approaches, unrealistically large amount of work, it's overambitious, and there's lack of statistical consideration. These are some of the common things that, not all of them hopefully in one application, but in some applications. Some other common problems are the significance of the problem is not obvious or low, the approach is flawed, the feasibility is unsupported, poor writing. Poor writing and bad grantsmanship really drives reviewers nuts. So I really recommend that you have somebody else who's maybe not that familiar with your research look over your application and see if they understand what you're trying to get across. Deficient environment. I think here at Emory, that should not be a problem with you all because you have great institutional support here. And again, the wrong mechanism for the work that you want to do. So some hallmarks of an outstanding application: you have strong significance to an important problem in public health. There's high impact, and then high degree of novelty and innovation. Strong track record by the applicant or the collaborators, clear rationale, there's relevant and supportive preliminary data, there's a clear and focused approach, and there's careful attention to details for the presentation of the application, the readability, the clarity of data, graphics, error bars. So they look at all those things, and if they start looking at that and they don't know why you put that graph in because you don't title it or say what it's for, as soon as they get irritated with one thing, they might look for another thing, and then it just starts snowballing. So do your best to try to pay attention to these kind of things that are pretty easy to make sure they're okay. Yes? Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I live in the CFAR world, so I think a lot of institutions have small, like, pilot programs, pilot projects. That's one way. You don't have to bring an established investigator in as a multiple PI, but as a collaborator, as a consultant. You know, you can bring in people to help where maybe your track record, you know, is not as good, but they can bring in like the biostatistical expertise or something. So that's the way to get around it. But again, you know, if you're going for like a new investigator award, those things should be pretty, you know, it should know. I mean, you'll mark your application as new investigator, so hopefully reviewers will take that into consideration.
Could this be addressed through strong publications?
Strong publications too, yeah, good point.
Okay, applications and other applications like that, do you go more with a program officer that's specific to your field, within a particular institution like an NIH, or do you go for somebody who just does the type of cases, you know, like you?
That's a good question. So the question was, do you go for a K, or do you go with a program officer who has your area of expertise, or the person assigned to like a KO8 or whatever? I don't know about other institutes, but like in the Division of AIDS at NIH, you would go for the people who are program officers for the K award, because they know all the nuances around, you know, what K awards can do, what the, you know, the different things. Like I wouldn't be able to help you with the K, but like my colleagues who, you know, are K program officers would be able to help you with those things.
So. That a program officer would also be able to help you with that question?
Yes. So let's say you do have some contact with a program officer in your area, and that program officer doesn't have Ks in their portfolio, they can direct you to the right person. Yeah. Yes. If you come in as a co-I on someone else's investigators, you still are eligible for the new invest. Only the multiple PI if you come in as a contact PI.
Is it also so that if you wanted to bring a senior person in as a co-investigator,
yeah,
not as an PI, you're also not doing that?
Right. If you bring an established investigator as a co-investigator, you don't risk your new investigator status.
What if you're technically both, you know, PI situations?
But you're not the contact PI? Yes. If you're the contact PI, then you are not eligible for the new investigator status.
I think it's either MPI, contact or not.
Yeah.
But if you're both new or new investigators, that should be, you should get the real.
Right. Good question. Okay. So how do we make funding decisions at NIH? Again, like I said, different institutes have different policies and pay lines to fund grant applications. NIH mostly funds by scientific merit as judged by peer review and reflected in your overall impact score or percentile for investigator-initiated R01. If an application is assigned to a different institute, then you would need to talk to the PO of that institute to figure out what their policies and processes are. But at NIH, we have two ways of making funding decisions, and it's based on opportunity type. We have unsolicited, investigator-initiated, and that's using a percentile or score-based cutoff called a pay line. Applications for solicited NIH requested research are funded by overall impact score in score order based on availability of funds. And sometimes based on priority, we may skip one and pick up the next one.
I have a question from Zoom. Is it best to show that you have been consistently publishing, or should your publications be in your recent area? For example, they should come from your postdoctoral or graduate experience at the time of your application.
So the question was on publication.
Yeah.
is this for a K? I would think for a K or something that you would want to show all of your publications. But if your publication, especially if they're related to what your grant application is on, because they will look at your publication record, and especially if you're, if you're in first or last author, probably more likely first.
We're able to get an answer to the question about multiple PIs.
Yes.
If in a multiple PI application, those are new investigators, then you don't give up your new investigator. It is not disadvantageous
Okay.
to either one if you're both.
If you're both new investigators and you apply an MPI, then you don't give up your new investigator status. See, I don't know everything.
But either one is not a new, whether it's contact or not, then it's out.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Curious,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of, That's why it's important to talk to your program officer to see whether you should come in as an MPI or not, because there could be impact to your future. So for investigator-initiated applications, again, we fund by the pay line at NIH, and each major activity code, like an R01, for example, has a pay line, and right now our interim pay line, I think, is 16% for a new investigator, I believe 12% for established investigators. But once we get a budget, those will shift. And so again, it's important to talk to your program officer, because let's say you miss the pay line by 1 point. There's ways that program officers, especially for the Division of AIDS, if you are in a resubmission in A1, we might be able to help you with a selective pay. But we can keep you on the radar, but if the pay line changes, then it's better to get the 5 years of funding, but it's important to keep.
And is it true that your impact score and your percentile pay line are not the same?
Right. Your impact score and your pay line are not the same thing. And it'll vary by each study section and what applications are reviewed at the time that yours are. So you might have, let's say you might one time have a score of 30. It might be 12% in that study section. But another time you might have a score of 30 and it might be, like 20 percentiles. So it's really important to look at the percentile if we fund using percentiles for that mechanism. And the pay lines are published online. So, but as I mentioned before, some applications are funded beyond the pay line at the end of the fiscal year, and through special funding programs like selective pay. And at NIH, all applications that rank under the pay line bar are funded. So if our pay line is 14%, if you have 14% and under, you'll be funded. Some institutes use different methods, but so for RSAs and PAs with set-aside funds, we fund in score order based on impact score, and we say mostly because sometimes, as I mentioned before, we might skip one if it's an application that better meets the priorities of the institute. So, but most of the time, it's usually in score order, and on those funding announcements, it will say how much money we have set aside for that particular announcement. So what should you do if you don't get funded? You should carefully read the summary statement, get all your anger out at the reviewers, to yourself, not in your response. Think about whether you can readily fix the concerns that the reviewers point out. Can you clarify things that they might have misunderstood? Do they have conceptual problems that you can address? Consult with people within your institution, your mentors, your colleagues to see, get their thoughts and evaluate your options. Should you revise and submit again? Like, again, as I said, should you revise at the next cycle? Should you wait until you get more data? Or maybe you should choose a new research direction. And that's happened in some cases where, it's not an area that even the institute's interested in. And again, if you talk to your program officer, you might avoid some of these pitfalls. So, if you don't get a grant on your first attempt, which is very common, again, because the pay line is at 12 or 14%, that means a lot of applications aren't funded during that cycle. Modify your application based on the review. Don't rush. Address all your major weaknesses, especially those in the summary of the discussion and overall impact paragraph. Submit the modified A1 for review. If the A1 is not considered for funding, then it'll go to, you have to resubmit as a new application. And at that point, don't refer to your old review because it's going to be considered as a new application. Again, talk to your program officer to find out if there's options for special funding, like selected pay, or sometimes there might be options to give you 1 year of funding so that you can get more preliminary data to then have a more robust application. Ask the program officer about, did the reviewers like your idea, but they just wanted to know more information, or did they totally hate it? What other insight can they give you? Because more than likely, they should have been there to listen to what the reviewer said, and they can kind of give you some insight into that process. Are there any issues with the presentation about your application? Then there are some hard-to-fix problems, and that's when you might consider whether you need to go in a new direction, and that's if it's low impact, the research topic that you have. If there's philosophical issues, for example, if reviewers don't think the work that you're proposing is highly significant, if the hypothesis isn't sound or not supported by the data that you provided, the work's already been done and it's really not going to impact the field, if the methods that you proposed were not suitable for testing the hypothesis. Don't give up, because it's very common to have initial failure. It's important that you learn from a failed submission. Again, like I said, I was kind of joking, but not really. Keep a positive tone and attitude, because the reviewers, I think they get like $200 or something small. They get a small honorarium. It's basically community service that they're doing for the scientific community, and they're reviewing stacks of applications. And so if they're taking the time to provide you with feedback, even if you don't agree, be respectful and have a good tone when you respond, because when they review, it's most likely going to be that same study section, probably some of the same reviewers reviewing. And they're going to want to know that you thought the feedback that you provided them was really great. And if you don't agree with them, be respectful of that too. Just say, thank you for that, but maybe here's some more information that'll help, address some of the concerns they had. So there's some factors that affect the timing of grant awards. So, like as I mentioned, we don't have a congressional appropriation now. If your application goes to September or October council, it'll be funded in the next fiscal year. So that's for now it would be FY20. And so there might be a delay in funding. And whether your application's score is in the gray zone. So again, if you miss it by like a couple of points, that's something that could affect it, because the pay line could get better once we have a budget, depending on how much we get. And then whether your application goes to expedited council review. It takes about 8 weeks for the council meeting. They do that second level of review. And then if you have a foreign component in your award, that's again something you should talk to your program officer about, because you can maybe start getting the approval for that in the meantime. And then if you have a complex type of grant, then you might need some help from your grant management specialist, because that can affect the timing if they need all this extra information. Shelley and Kimby know that. If you're not funded right away, take action. Again, we can put your application on hold for possible funding at the end of the year. But again, that's why it's important to talk to your program officer, because they can strategize with you. Should you wait or should you resubmit? That's something that will be based on what comes out of your summary statement, what your scores are, and how close you are to the pay line. And then if your application is deferred for funding, we recommend that you start revising right away and determine if your problems are fixable. NIH typically defers decisions for such applications until June or July. So because it's tied to our fiscal year. So starting in mid to late summer, we fund as many applications as we can for our budget. So timing is really important, and again, talk to your program officer. So it looks like, oh, question.
You just take those grants like that, and then so like you have a list of grants doing like 150. It's like what you have, you have like 10 that you're going to, then yes, it's just one grant. And it would be worthwhile to like resubmit, like you talking like, hey, I just relocated.
So it'll be on individual basis. So if so he was like, he asked if, do we fund like straight 1 through 10, and then if we run out of funding, should you resubmit or wait? So if it's by pay line, then we'll submit everything up to that pay line, so 14%. If you miss it by a couple of points, then your program officer will talk to you about whether you should resubmit or wait. And it's all going to be on an individual basis. If in the summary statement it seemed like you would have gotten a better score because if you had a little bit more data and it's your first submission, most likely they'll recommend that you resubmit. It's only really for NIAID and DAYS in the case of an A1 application, your second application, your revised one, that you would want to talk about like selective pay and things like that. And as I said before, sometimes we'll reach back to the first application if it has a better score. So that's why it's important to talk to your program officer. I think you can submit as long as you have a summary statement. So like if you're in the gray zone, so I don't think it would hurt because the way that we do things in the Division of 8, like if your program officer is going to put you up for a selective pay, they will want to talk to you because they're going to want to know if this person doesn't get funded, this investigator doesn't get funded, they're going to have to close their lab, they're going to have to let go of their postdoc, they're just going to leave the field completely. They're going to want to know those things because that helps them build a stronger argument for why your grant should be, because we're all, we all might have a couple of people in our portfolio who are in a similar predicament, but if, you have no other funding and this is it, those are things, especially for a new investigator, that will be taken into consideration. So any new information, like you have new publication that came out after it was reviewed, and maybe that addresses some of that, it doesn't hurt to share that. It'll be up to them whether they use that information or if they feel it's useful. Okay, so again, if funding's likely, if you have concerns like human subjects and animal or whatever, they'll work with program officers will work with you on resolving that, and they'll walk you through the just-in-time requirements. But again, that's really the grants management person that is going to review your just-in-time requirements. So what happens if you miss the pay line? If we don't fund a NIAID, one thing we might do is we might see if another institute might take it. Maybe they have a better pay line. Like maybe you would have met their pay line if it went to their institute. We'll talk to POs that we know from other institutes who have a vested interest in your area, and they might take it because maybe they're able to do it and they're really interested in your study. So again, important to talk to your program officer to see maybe there's another institute that would be interested. Again, I talked about selective pay. It's possible that if you miss it, that's an option. So what happens is, again, the PO will nominate your application that scores just above the pay line for selective pay, and then it has to go through the second level of review. The advisory council also has to agree with the recommendation from program. If you score outside the pay line, should you resubmit or wait? This is probably what you were asking. Advise that you not wait to see if you're funded later in the fiscal year. It's better to get a head start on either improving your application based on the feedback or submitting a new application. So again, it's all going to vary, so you really should talk to your program officer. I think you'll have access to these slides later, but there are a number of resources that our colleagues have put together So it's for NIH, you can look for program officers within the 3 divisions we have outside of NIH, or even within NIH, you can use the matchmaker tool, and there's a link to that for a reporter. But if you already have a funding opportunity announcement in mind, then you should contact the program officer named in that announcement, because they're the ones who developed that initiative, they wrote it, they know what they want to see coming into that, and they're going to be the expert in that. After you apply, if you want to figure out who was assigned to your grant, you can find that in your e-commons account, and then you can contact them. And then they should also be listed in your notice of award. One thing that comes up in some of these talks that my coworkers have shared is that the notice of award is not made to you, right? It's made to your institution. So let's say you get an award here at Emory, and then someone offers you a job at another institution. It's up to your institution to agree to whether you can take that award with you, because grants are made to institutions, not to TIs. Most of the time, I've never seen it where the institution doesn't allow it. Have you guys? I think usually they let you take it with you, but again, it's an important thing to remember.
In situations where a PI has offered.
If there's somebody who can do the work, yeah. And that also has to get prior approval from your institute that funded it. And then here's more really good resources about grant tutorial, standard receipt dates, where you can find pay lines, and really good information for early stage investigators that you can look at.
I'm going to give a plug, and she's not being needed. Even if you're not doing research related to NIH, their website is probably the best of all the institutes, and it's diagnostic. I mean, the site really applies. They have a great library of materials. It's a really well done website.
Thank you. I mean, and you know, I think that's one thing I can say is most of the program, pretty much all the program officers I know really, I mean, we're here, our job is to help you. Your success is our success. We want to see you succeed. We want to, you know, we're there to help you. So don't be afraid to contact your program officer, especially with new investigators. We really want to see that next generation of investigators. So please don't hesitate. And this, I think, goes across, like, so the CFAR program is funded by 11 other institutes, and I can say the same for my colleagues at the other institutes. That we really have a vested interest in seeing you all succeed. So we have a little bit of time for questions or discussion. Okay.
I'll kick it off. So occasionally, there'll be a program officer who won't respond to an email.
Yes.
It probably doesn't happen that often.
It does happen.
Oh, okay, you think so. So if that happens, what course of action can someone take? Is there, I mean, can you say, want to talk to your manager? I mean, like, what is the?
I would say, you know, most of the time, you know, they're not, sometimes the delay can be because they're trying to figure out, like, I might not be the right person, and they're trying to figure out who might be. Usually I'll respond and say, let me get back to you, but not everybody does that. I would contact them again or pick up the phone and call them. I mean, most of the time they do want to help you. If, I don't know, if not, contact it, you know, go to use that matchmaker tool and see if there's another program officer that might match with you. But hopefully they will contact you, especially if they put out a funding opportunity announcement. They'll definitely want to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much again.
You're welcome. Good luck to all of you.